Welcome back. In this video, we're going to go through adding columns, removing columns, and grouping them together. So to get there, click on the outline on the left-hand side next to filters. This is the place I would go next after making sure that the filters are properly set and we've got the right records coming into our report. It's now important to choose what pieces of data from those records we want to display in the report. And just like there are default filters that can be applied, there are often default columns in your report based on the report type. And so here we've got a bunch of stuff that we don't need. So the first thing to do at this point is get rid of all those columns that just don't have useful data, because it's going to make it harder for people to find the valuable data, the useful stuff. In this case, less is definitely more. So let's get rid of these columns that have empty values or things we're just not interested in. In this case, what we ultimately want to see are our opportunities by stage. So we don't really need to see owner role. Opportunity owner, though, could be useful. Account name, I would typically leave that in. Stage, we definitely want. Fiscal period, we won't need. And there's quite a few others we don't need. So go through and just click the little X next to the columns that you're not interested in. You can always add them back later if you want. I'm going to leave amount. I'm going to get rid of expected revenue and probability. Age can be useful, so I'll leave that. Close date and created date, I'm going to leave both of those, and then I'll get rid of next step and type. There we go. So we've got a much more simplified report preview here. You can also remove columns by clicking the down arrow at the column header and clicking remove column there. You can rearrange these columns by dragging and dropping them on the left-hand side, or you can drag and drop them at the column header area as well. Now let's start grouping this data, because at this point we just have like a flat spreadsheet of information. But what I want to see is how many opportunities do I have at each stage? What does my pipeline look like? So under group rows, I'm going to search for the field stage, but you could search for any other field that you want to group those opportunities. When you select that first grouping, you'll see the preview changes, and all the way on the left-hand side, stage shows up. And then within each stage, we have as many records that are there in the preview coming through. You might find that you create a grouping, but you don't have more than one record in each of those groupings, or maybe there's a grouping that's missing. That could be because we're just looking at preview data. You don't really know what the information is going to look like until you hit that run button in the upper right-hand corner. Speaking of that, let's hit save so that the work that you've done so far is not lost. When you click the save button, it's going to prompt you to give this report a name and put it in a folder. I'm going to call this course pipeline report, but you can call it anything you'd like. You could give a description if you choose, and then select that folder. Remember, if you put it in a folder, other people need to have access to that folder in order to see the report. So I'm going to put it in my key metrics folder, which is public within our org. Once you hit save, we can then continue editing. So we've grouped by stage. We could add additional groupings here. Let's say we also want to take a look at created date. Or actually, better yet, let's take a look at close date. So we're selecting close date, and now we've got two different levels of groupings for these rows. The first one is stage, the second is the close date. With dates, it's going to default to grouping the records by the actual day. That's how specific it is. But you can tell it to be less specific. So if you click that down arrow next to close date, we have an option here that says group date by, and you could choose day or week, month, quarter. Most often people want to look at opportunity reports by month, usually month or quarter. Day is a little too specific, unless you really want to give detailed analysis about how many opportunities are closing day by day within a given month or a quarter. So I chose month here. And now we've got a broader grouping on the close date side. You can drag and drop these on the left-hand side too, to rearrange which one is on top and which one is underneath. And then you can also group by columns. So columns does not show up until you have at least one row that's been grouped. So if I wanted to move from grouping rows to grouping columns, you can actually click and drag that down. And what we get now is we have groupings on both axes. So on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, we've got stage, and then on the x-axis, towards the top, we've got the close date. Now it's reverted to grouping by the specific day again, So I'm going to click the drop down arrow here and tell it to group by month. There we go. This results in a matrix report. So we can see a summary of how many opportunities we have in each month in each stage. And you can see the count coming through here. Let's say we want to add a little more summary information. Well, you can do that by clicking, say, the amount column here and clicking that arrow next to it. And there's a summarize option. You can choose sum, average, max, min, or the median value that's taken from this column. I'm going to choose sum. And once you've added that summary, it's going to show up in our matrix at the top. This can be a really good way to see a lot of summary information in a pretty concise space. I'm actually going to get rid of the close date though. If I get rid of that column, it's going to go back to just our rows being grouped, but we still have our amounts being summarized and we have subtotals at each grouping level. So you can see what's the total amount that I've got in each stage. If you want to add additional columns, of course, you can search for the columns here. But if you don't know the names of those fields that you want to add as columns, click on that fields drawer on the left-hand side and double click on any of these that you might want to add. You can also drag and drop the fields over to the column area. Once you have at least one grouping in your report, you'll see that extra features show up. At the bottom, you can turn row counts on or off. You can turn on or off detail rows, subtotals, and grand totals. The detail rows toggle is quite useful. If I turn that off, it's going to collapse and it's going to hide all those details about the records. Instead, just show us the groupings and the summaries at the grouping level. It's another way to concisely see a lot of information in a really small space. Let me toggle that back on. The other thing that you'll be able to do once you add one group to your report is add a chart. That's what we've got up here in the upper right-hand corner. And that's the subject of our next lesson. I'll see you in our next video.